Again, we've moved out to my workshop this time because we've got a bit of metal work to do. Whilst I was out here, I've discovered arming points as I normally make them, about a metre long.
Hold it up against your chest so I can see it.
So I'll chop that into probably 4 lengths, maybe even 5. Now 4 lengths is good. That's a set of arming points all made as one go. However, today we're talking about aiglets. Now, aiglets come in a number of different sizes. There's quite a short one there, which is more common in the late 15th, I think. Do your research on this though. And a longer one, which is an earlier style. Do be sure to check the kind of aiglets you're getting before you spend any money on them. Now, 3 ways of making aiglets. The easiest, the one I usually go for, is to buy them. You can buy them for, I think I get about 30 for £10, something like that, from someone who makes them. Another cheap option is this. I tend to use these on footwear rather than armour. That is a section of brass tube purchased again from a model train hobby shop, and I've simply cut it into lengths and sliced it down one side, and I will glue that onto shoelaces and things like that to stop them fraying. But today's job, we're first going to show you how you can make your own. Now, I've already cut out from a piece of brass sheet this little shape. As I mentioned before, this brass sheet is quite easy to get from, again, model supply stores like that train shop that I was talking about. I'll just check the thickness on it for you. And that appears to be 0.5 mil. I think. Yeah. So it's 0.5 millimetres thick, which is quite sufficient for this purpose. Anything thicker than that, you start struggling to work it because you're going to have to bend it into quite a tight shape. So, I've cut it out with some aviation snips, which leave this corrugated edge. Use some tin snips if that's all you've got. They're quite easy to and cheap to obtain, and they will work on this thickness of brass. So what I'm going to do, I've got an old metalworking vise here. I've simply put a piece of leather in it to stop it damaging the brass, because I don't really want the grip pattern putting into my brass. I'll just ease that into the jaws.
You've sandwiched the brass in between the leather. 2 pieces of leather,
yeah. And now I close the jaws up on that. I'll hold it nice and steady whilst I file it. It's a simple back and forth job. It's worth having a set of needle files if you're going to try doing something like this.
Why are you filing it?
To take the corrugations off the edges. We don't want spiky bits all over our aiglets. It will cut into the cord.
But if you're using tin snips, you wouldn't have that anyway.
It wouldn't be anything like as bad, no. I've also cut it slightly larger than I needed so I could file it there. It'll just take us a minute or so to do all the sides on this. there you can see why it's important to clamp it low down in the vise, because I've managed to bend it. If that happens, put it on something solid and make it flat again. I've already annealed this piece of brass, which is why it's discoloured. Annealing is a process of heating it up until it's a cherry red colour, and then leaving it to air cool. This will make it soft and flexible, much easier to work than if you just try and do it straight. Again, if you want to know more than that about annealing, there's a lot of resources out there that will tell you about it. Now what I'm doing here is just taking off the rough edges that I've left when I filed it. If you leave these on, they will cut your thread, and that will be embarrassing.
Especially if you're in the middle of a battle.
Yeah, it's not so bad if your aiglets fall off. So it's just quite quickly and lightly work over the edges at this angle, just to take it off. And run your fingers over it a lot. You'll know when it's sharp and when it's not. Your fingers are quite good for that, apparently. Now, our next job is to shape it. Before we do that, I need to tell you something else I've made. This started life as a piece of a nail. It had already been chopped off. I'd used the end for something else. What I've done here is I've just used an angle grinder to shape this to a point of about the right kind of slope that I want. If I wanted to make a longer aiglet, like this one, obviously I'd need it a much longer point down to here, much gentler taper, and probably even further back, so that's quite a thin one. I'm making quite a short fat one, more like that, so I've got an appropriate length. This is a lump of lead. Be careful with these, they can be dangerous. It's a piece of roofing lead that I've just folded up a few times, and I've placed my anvil, my shape, into it, and just hammered it a few times with a heavy hammer. So what we're going to do now is we're going to place the brass into that spot, place my template piece on it, and just going to try and get some shape onto it. This is the faffy part where we have to try and get it to line up properly with what we've just done. Tell you what I am going to do is take a pair of pliers and see if they'll help me. As I say, the brass is currently extremely malleable because I've annealed it. It will work harden into something quite a bit tougher. Surprisingly quickly, actually. Right, back into the lead. See if we can get some final shaping. Obviously, there's a certain amount of practice to this. You'll find the more you practice, the more you'll find better ways of doing it. I think I've left my bottom section a bit too thick, so I'm going to have to take a bit of brass off there. Don't forget once you've done that, you need to just take the edges back off, because you've just put some sharp edges on it again. So there, we've taken it down a bit. Let's see if we can squeeze that point in a bit more. That was a little more squeezing than I wanted. Now, we've got the edges slightly out of alignment where we want them now. You want to make sure that one of them is slightly outside the other. That's better. So, if necessary, they can overlap. Right, we've got a decent shape there now. Not perfect, but not bad. As you can see, nice little conical spike. Now we've got a slight error in the curves, so I'm just going to, again, out with some nice rough needle files. You can do this on a bench grinder. It's certainly faster if you do, but you're going to have to do a bit of tidying up afterwards. I'm sorry I keep moving this around. I keep trying to find a slightly more comfortable position to hold it. Obviously you need to get in and work it in the best way possible. Now if we take a round file and just make sure that there's no sharp edges on the inside. Yeah, that feels pretty good. So, one aiglet made. Next step is we cut off one of those knots that we've put on. If you remember, we put these in place just to stop it fraying. Wow, it takes quite a bit of chopping through this stuff.
It's just as older than you.
Yeah. And then we can wind it down. I'll put it onto this. Right, time for a cunning trick now. Wood glue. So I take that, squirt it into my aiglet. Would look better, I think, if it hadn't dried on top of the bottle. If the bottle was open even.
Why wood glue rather than any other glue?
Why wood glue? I don't know. You don't really want to use something like rubber cement. It's probably not strong enough. This has got a better grip to it. Aiglets is decidedly overkill, as is super glue, which could make a mess of your brass. Historic Enterprises, which is where I got this idea from, recommend Gorilla Glue. Its tendency to expand worries me a little on that. It's a good compromise between working with the thread and working with the brass, basically. What we're going to do is just dip that in there a few times. So we've now got a glue saturated cord. And now, wipe off the excess. Now we can start looking at closing it up. Now we've got, remember that overlap that I said was important? And this is why, because you're just going to ease it shut. And the inside piece is going to be overlapped by the outside piece. Just work that in. Right, now I'm just going to move on to some form of anvil. We'll use the vise for that. This is a good solid one. It's worth holding this in pliers. It makes your hand ache less. And it matters a bit less if you hit the pliers than if you hit your fingers. So we're just going to tap this in, get it good and tight on our cord. By rotating it like this, we're working the brass round. So we're keeping that conical shape. How's that looking? That's good. Right, final stage, if we just move it to the edge now, we want to place it on the edge like that and use the hammer at an angle. We're just going to tap in these edges. Gets tricky rotating it, but you notice the brass is work hardening now. It's getting harder and harder to shape it. That's fine, that's what we want, because we don't want it being crushed by the armour when we're wearing it. You should be able, a little bit more needs doing that. Should be able to see on that a slight taper inwards on the back end of the aiglet, which is something we see on the surviving examples. We can make this more pronounced if we make a little tool like this. This is a piece of metal bar. I partially drilled a large hole into it, drilled a small hole into it, and then just cut a slot so that I've got access for thread. And we just place the aiglet in like that. Hold it in place with our finger. This is based on an illustration in the Museum of London, book on dress accessories, I believe. It's also where I got the idea about the 5-strand plait. How they think. This may have been made. And it certainly seems to work alongside a bit of judicious handling. Right, that's one aiglet fitted. Now this is cheap and simple. I've just glued them on. I do that for arming points because it's not that important that it's very authentic. It's more important that it's quick and easy. If you've got holes, you can...
Holes?
Holes. If you've got holes
in
your
the
aiglet,
right,
you can nail them on as well. Now, what I've just done there is force the aiglet open because it's quite a tight fit for this cord to fit inside. still glue it. There is no good reason not to glue your aiglets on. It really does help keep them in place. Experimented with for a few years with them just being nailed on, and it just wasn't as reliable. Since I've been gluing them on, I hardly lose any. So yeah, huge thanks to Medieval Enterprises for that little tip. Right, we're just going to jam that as far in there as it will go. This is a pre-manufactured one. These normally do have holes in. And we're just going to do the same thing again, just close it down. Paying particular attention to getting the ends nice and tight. Two reasons you want to crimp the ends in like this. One, it will help to hold the aiglet on. Just wipe away any excess glue. Right, it's very, very important you do this next bit before the glue dries. If you're trying to put this through the glue, it's going to be really hard work. I use a panel pin. I've already annealed this, so I've used a blowtorch, again, heated it up till it's cherry red. We just have to move down to a wooden surface for this. Heated it up till it's cherry red. It makes it much easier to move around, to bend and rivet. I'm afraid you're not going to be able to see this very well because it's all a bit on the small side.
Basically, you're just putting a nail into the hole.
Yeah, through both holes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the plan. However, you've got to get it through the point in the right angle, which is often not easy. I tend to do this with clothing points, as I think they're going to be a bit more observed by the public, and it is something we see a lot in the historic examples. I just don't think this one's going to play. It's going to make its own hole. So there, we've gone through. Now, there are a lot of different ways you can take the end off a panel pin. Use a hacksaw if you're desperate. The cutter part and a pair of pliers will do the job quite adequately. Because I do a lot of this kind of stuff, I've got myself some bolt cutters. What we're just going to do is we're going to nip off the tip. If we can. I'm going to nip it off the other side as well.
How close to the aiglet are you taking it off?
Very close. The usual rule when riveting things is, I think it's half the diameter of the rivet is the height from the base. So as these rivets are a few millimetres across, you want to take it off a few millimetres up. This one is definitely worth using pliers to hold it, because it's a really good way to get your hand hit. And we just tap it on the sides, on the edges, start it flattening down. This is exactly the same as changing rivets on your armour, just much, much smaller. Shaping, but it's not. see that the rivet is definitely spreading on that side, and I need to turn it over and make sure we get a similar amount of spread on this side. Now, that rivet's misbehaved a little, so I might just tidy it up with a file. Probably left a bit too much on top. I do hope the camera work on this isn't making me feel too queasy. I'm really making my camera handler, who's my lovely, lovely wife, has been very kind to do this for me.
And we'll be rewarded with chocolate later.
Definitely. Yeah, I'm really making her work on this one by moving it round in lots of different places. Sorry, my love. Right, that's not bad. As you can see, we've now got...
I can't see very much blurry.
Is that better?
No. Yeah.
As you can see, we've got our egglet now riveted onto the thread. Only loads more of these to do. Right, that's covered just about everything I can think of. You might want to give your egglet a polish after that, especially if it's been heat treated. They can end up some odd colours. Yeah, that's been good. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. I hope this sets you up nicely making your own egglets. Goodbye, good luck.